Hi, it's Nicole, and today I'll be doing my Invisible Cities wrap-up for January, where we focused on Algeria and Singapore. The first Algerian author that comes to mind for most Europeans and North Americans is probably Camus, which is controversial because he was a second-generation Algerian whose grandparents were, I guess, colonizers to Algeria, and he was against the Algerian independence movement for native Algerians. I feel like it's complicated though in that I wouldn't exclude him from being counted as an authentic Algerian voice, but maybe that is skewed because of my Western perspective and a bias in favor of some of his works that I've actually enjoyed. The first book that I read from Camus, I think, was actually The Myth of Sisyphus, which was quite a difficult read for me. I read it maybe about 7 years ago or so, and I didn't understand everything in it, but there were definitely chunks of it that I really appreciated. It's a book that I've wanted to revisit to see if I can gain anything more from it now than I did when I first encountered it, although I'm still intimidated to do that reread. I had actually planned to revisit it this month, but I ended up reading a different book for Algeria this month, which I'll talk about a little bit later. After reading The Myth of Sisyphus, I decided that I wanted to try some of Camus' fiction, so I picked up The Stranger. This was also the first book that I read fully in French, and that experience was really good. I enjoyed the book, and I also enjoyed the process of reading this book in French. And it's possibly that bias that makes me a little conflicted over Camus and the fact that I did enjoy this book. I had a good experience with it, and so there's all of that stuff to consider, I guess, in whether or not my opinion on the book is skewed. But basically the story follows a man who is rather emotionless. He doesn't seem to be particularly empathetic in any way, and he senselessly murders someone and then goes to trial over it. And I think a lot of the philosophical themes that come up in this book really interested me at the time. The idea of our societal expectations of how people should behave, especially in the face of certain types of relationships that we like to hold up as being, sacred or something. I really liked the philosophical parts of this book. However, I realized that this book obviously can also be read through a social lens that is problematic, particularly as far as Camus handles his Arab characters in the book. And so, there is that element to it as well, and I think the criticisms there are fair. And it's that critical analysis that made me want to pick up the Meursault investigation by Kamel Daoud. I have not picked that up yet because I want to read it in French, and at the moment I can only find access to it in English. Obviously I could just read that, but I'm kind of trying really hard to read books that were originally in French if I can, so I didn't get around to that, unfortunately. But the conversation between those two books really interests me. I'm assuming that the Meursault investigation is looking at The Stranger through a lens that is aware of the colonial implications of the original text, and that kind of conversation really interests me, so I'd like to get to that at some point, maybe this year, I don't know. And then the last book that I read from Camus, again not this month, but that I've read at all from Camus, is Create Dangerously, which I think collects two of his essays. The essay that was titled Create Dangerously, I really liked that one. A conversation about creation, particularly creation that has some sort of agenda, for lack of a better word. That is a discussion that I'm really drawn to, maybe for obvious reasons, because I am an illustrator, and communicating through the visual medium is part of what I do. Obviously, when you're talking about writers, they're not communicating through the visual medium, they're using words, but it's a very similar process of getting these ideas across through art. So I really enjoyed that text as he was talking about involvement in resistance movements. And it's interesting to me that despite him understanding why one would stand up against oppressive forces and use one's art in that way, he would also still be against Algerian independence. But from what I understand, I can see why he would be invested in some sort of middle ground, and it seems like his stance was not appreciated by either side of the argument for or against Algerian independence. So I would like to really dig more into that and find out about his stance in particular, why he felt that way beyond just, his familial ties and his personal reasons and things like that, if he had any other reasons for the stance that he took, and if he was aware of the hypocrisies that seems to unearth in when we look at some of the other things he said about resisting oppressive regimes and things like that. But the book that I did read this month was A Bookshop in Algiers by Kauter Adimi, and that was really good. I listened to it on audiobook, and I feel like that actually probably was not the best way to consume this book, but that's how I read it. I mean, I think that it would have been good if I were more focused in the book rather than on the thing that I was doing while reading the book, which was some work I was working on. But I liked the way that this bookshop and the story meant a lot to different people in different ways, and I liked the way that she went from past to present, looking at the owner of the bookshop versus the guy who was coming in to tear it all down, essentially. And what books did or didn't mean to those people, what literature did or didn't mean to them. I liked the kind of look at people who see books as sacred versus people who just see them as objects that are not particularly important, and I feel like I sit somewhere in the middle. I obviously enjoy books and I like the object of them as well as just what, the words within, but at the same time I do also just see them as objects. I liked that book and I would recommend it. I think it was a good pick for Algeria. It felt like it had a bit of the spirit of the country in it, in a way, and it also was interesting that a book like that did have a lot of talk about someone like Camus, who, for all of his controversialness, is kind of inextricably linked to the country's literary scene. Next, I wanted to just briefly mention Rashid Taha. I think most people know him for his cover of Rock the Casbah, but I actually first heard his music in Black Hawk Down, where they used Barra, I think, in one of the dramatic scenes or whatever, and I really liked that song, and I feel like I should have looked him up ages ago. Anyway, that is a CD that I wanted to listen to in January. I'm probably going to listen to it this month instead, because I didn't get around to listening to it last month. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that because I'm trying to expand my Invisible Cities project involvement beyond just books. And then on that note, because I didn't actually get to read any of the books that I wanted to read for Singapore because they weren't easily accessible to me, I'd like to mention a documentary that I really liked by Sandi Tan called Shirkers, and it's just a really interesting story about a Singapore film that never got made, and yet it still had a huge impact on the Singaporean film scene, apparently. I love the way that Tan presents the documentary. I love how her humor comes out in it. I love how she presents her friends in it. And I mean, friendship is like a big buzzword theme thing for me anyway. And everything about this film I really liked, and it made me really feel the loss of this film that just never got made in the end. So I hope you check that out because I really enjoyed it. It's a bit weird in a way, but I think if you like sort of slightly off-kilter indie films with that kind of pacing and sort of, not sarkiness exactly, but that sort of slightly edged humor, I think you might like this documentary. So that's it for my Invisible Cities project stuff for January, and then I want to talk a little bit about what I'm going to be reading in February. This month is Black History Month for the US, and so I'm probably going to read at least one book that focuses on Black history. Again, I mentioned before that for Black History Months, February for the US, October for the UK, I'll probably be focusing on Black history rather than Black culture because I'm reading books that are kind of Black culture and just by Black authors and whatever all throughout the year anyway, as I feel like we should all do kind of, that kind of thing. One of the books that I actually picked up for Indie Press Project last year and just never got around to was War to Windrush, so that's one that I want to read this year, whether that's this month for US Black History Month or in October for UK Black History Month, which maybe it's more appropriate then, but whatever, just get to things when I can. I am definitely going to try to get to this year. And the other book that I'm definitely going to get to this month is How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. This book actually ticks two boxes of both Black history and Guyana, and Guyana is one of the countries that we'll be looking at for Invisible Cities in February, and I'll be buddy reading that with Georgiana in the Invisible Cities Discord group. I find that buddy reads have been really good at keeping me accountable and making sure that I actually read the things that I say I want to read, so I'm looking to do more of those this year if possible. But those are the two books that I've set aside to get to for Black History Month. And I guess that's also a little peek into one of the books that I'm going to be reading for February for Invisible Cities project as well. But I think that's all I have to say for my January Invisible Cities project reading and for some of my February TBR. Let me know what you read for Invisible Cities in January. Did you find anything new that you really liked? Did you try any recipes or listen to any music that you would recommend or anything like that, really? I'm really curious to see how people got on in January and if you got around to all the books that you wanted to read. I know I certainly didn't. Also, let me know what you'll be reading for February. Are you going to be doing any reading for Invisible Cities project, or are you going to be focusing on Black History Month, or are you going to try to merge the two? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!